네, 안녕하세요. 오늘 이 두 분의 유명한 미래학자를 모시고 여러분들에게 미래가 어떻게 변할 것인가, 특히 일자리 창출에 대해서 여러 가지 대안을 말씀드릴 겁니다. 연사분들을 소개를 하겠습니다. 왼쪽에 계신 분이 케니스 와인스타인, 허드슨 연구소의 그 회장이고 CEO입니다. 이분은 하버드 정치학 박사이시고 미 상원의원에서 주로 방송위원회 위원이나 차관급 직책을 여러 개를 맡았습니다. 인류복지, NGO위원회 등등 위원직을 했고요. 오늘 발표할 주제는 2030년이 되면 수명 연장, 3D 프린터, 인공지능 AI죠. 그리고 로봇, 사물 인터넷 이런 것들이 우리의 일자리를 많이 뺏어갈 것이다. 그 거대한 물결을 우리가 어떻게 막아낼 것인가, 아니면은 대안을 찾을 것인가에 대해서 상세하게 말씀을 드릴 것입니다. 그리고 토마스 프레이, 왼쪽에 계시는 이 토마스 프레이는 사우스다코타 대학에서 엔지니어링 공학 학사이고요. IBM에서 15년 근무하면서 260개의 혁신상, 뭐 IBM을 몇 개 살렸다 저는 이렇게도 얘기하는데, 다양한 디자인, 엔지니어링 이쪽으로 상을 많이 받았고, 미국의 천재 클럽 회원입니다. 이분이 천재입니다. 세계 미래회의 월 퓨처 소사이티에서 그 The Futurist라는 잡지가 있어요. 거기에 주로 혁신에 대한 이런 편집 기고를 하고 계시고, 현재는 다빈치 연구소의 소장입니다. 오늘 이야기할 주제는 과감한 예측들을 합니다. 산업시대의 제조업은 대부분 이제 피크를 치고 3분의 1 수준으로 종에서, 그죠? 종 벨커브에서 내려가는 소멸하고 있는 상태다. 피크 스틸, 그러니까 철강 산업은 2024년이 피크다. 그 이후에는 철강 대신에 뭐 그래피나 다른 걸 쓸 것이다. 전 세계 대학의 절반이 2030년, 지금부터 15년 후에 소멸한다. 20억만 개의 일자리도 2030에 소멸한다. 은행이나 주식시장도 AI 등이 나오면 없어질 수 있다. 90%의 언론, 기자, 기계가 이제 기사를 쓴다. 이런 예측들을 하고, 중요한 것은 대안입니다. 그러면 우리는 뭘 가지고 어떻게 대안을 마련할 것인가? 주로 부상 산업을 알아야 된다, 부상 기술을 알아야 된다, 이런 이야기를 하실 것입니다. 그래서 먼저 토마스 프레이 선생님이 약 한 40분간, 저는 될 수 있으면 많은 시간을 드리고 싶어요. 많이 준비해 왔기 때문에. 오케이, 다음 박수로 좀 환영해 주시기 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
Good morning. It's a great honor to be here with you today. We're a very backward-looking society. We're a backward-looking society because we've all personally experienced the past. As we look around us, we see evidence of the past all around us. All information that we come into contact with is essentially history. So the past is very knowable, and yet we're going to be spending the rest of our lives in the future. So it's almost as if we're walking backwards into the future. My job as a futurist is to help turn people around, to give them some idea of what the future might hold. So we'll do that here today. So what do we know about the future? We know the future is constantly unfolding. It's relentless. It's going to happen whether we want it to or not. It's one of nature's greatest forces. The future is going to happen whether or not we agree to participate. You should try it sometime. Say, I'm not going to go into the future. Good luck on that. The future's in control. If your next project is not aligned with the problems, needs, and desires of the future is going to kill it. Notice I said the problems, needs, and desires of the future, not of the present, not of the past. So how do we align ourselves with the needs of the future? The question we should be asking is, what does the future want? I spent a lot of time studying our relationship with the future, and I give it all these kind of human attributes. So inside this question is the key to our symbolic future. So our symbiotic future is, how do we relate with our future? How do we relate with the world around us? And can we do a better job of that? So when we ask this question, how does the future get created? The future actually gets created in the minds of everybody around us. Everybody participates in creating the future. People make decisions today based on their understanding of what the future holds. So I use this phrase, the future creates the present. Now this is just the opposite of what most people think. Most people think that what we're doing today is going to somehow create the future. But from a little different perspective, it's these visions that we have in our head determine our actions today. So if we change people's visions of the future, we change the way they make decisions today. So I'm going to change your visions of the future. And as a result of that, you're going to walk out of this event today making different decisions, because you will have a different perspective in how the future is going to unfold. That's my bold proclamation for today. So there are lots of interesting industries that are coming out of the woodwork. Atmospheric water harvesters are one that doesn't get talked about much, but atmospheric water harvesters are sucking moisture out of the air. So rather than taking water out of lakes, out of oceans, out of drilling holes in the ground, we're able to suck moisture out of the air. This happens to be a project, an MIT project in Peru. These are the work of water towers. The work of water towers are actually able to get around 100 liters a day sucked out of the air, and they're designed for little villages in Africa. They're designed around eliminating the need for all the young girls to walk miles and miles and miles to bring water into the local villages. They are teaching these people how to build their own water towers, and so then this gives them the tools to create one of the essential things for every village, which is clean water. Another version of this industry is Eoli Water Systems. This is a company in France that's making water towers, wind towers that actually suck moisture out of the air. They can get up to 500 liters a day out of the air depending on the humidity levels. They're testing these out in Abu Dhabi right now. A young inventor, Edward Liniger, designed airdrop systems. This is a solar-powered unit that actually sucks moisture out of the air to irrigate the plants nearby. So for this whole atmospheric water harvesting industry that's about to unfold, the holy grail for it is the self-filling water bottle. So the idea that you can have a water bottle that automatically fills itself wherever you go. If you're stranded on a life raft in the middle of the ocean, this is one of those tools that's the difference between life and death. Now this is one of those things that I call catalytic innovation. Catalytic innovation is different than disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation disrupts existing industries. Catalytic innovation creates entire new industries. So in the past, examples of catalytic industries are things like electricity, automobiles, airplanes, photographs, telephones. Each of these went on to create a multi-billion-dollar industry. A lot of the industries today were created as catalytic innovations. But here's the thing. All industries are a bell curve. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And yes, all industries will eventually end and get replaced by something else. The other part of what we're not paying attention to is most of the most profitable industries today happen to be in the second half of the bell curve. They're constantly being forced to do more with less. So as an example here, I'll talk about this concept of peak steel. Somewhere around 2024 is when we're projecting that we're going to run into the peak demand for steel in the entire world. After that, then we will have developed composite materials, and the overall demand for steel will start to decline. Now, there's another bell curve that goes along with it. The peak employment in the steel industry actually happened in the 1980s. In the United States, we had 3 times as many people working in the steel industry then as we do today, but we're still producing far more steel. So the peak employment ends up being a lead indicator for when there's going to be a decline in the overall demand for whatever goods or service an industry is all about. As my favorite physicist Max Planck likes to say, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So there's a number of people who are very influential in how we think about the world around us. And I'll just mention a few of them. Mark Andreessen was one of the guys that developed one of the first browsers. He says that software is eating the world. Vinod Khosla, who's actually the most successful venture capitalist of all times, he says that big data is going to eliminate the need for 80% of all doctors. Chris Anderson, the former managing editor of Wired magazine, he says that 3D printing is going to be bigger than the internet. And Pete Diamandis, the founder of Singularity University and the X Prize Foundation, he says that we're moving from a world with 10 billion people connected to the internet in 2010 to 7 billion connected by 2020. And I'll explain how that's going to happen. And since I didn't want to get left out myself, I have my own quote up here. Over 2 billion jobs are going to disappear by 2030. Now, when I make a statement like that, this is not a doom or gloom statement. This is intended to be a wake-up call. We're not going to have 2 billion people unemployed in the world, but we have to create systems for creating new jobs faster than ever before in history. Those systems currently don't exist. This is what I call the level problem. Now, a lot of us have used a tool like this as a level to straighten pictures or to do construction work. But once you download a level app, then suddenly you no longer have the need for that tool. You can use your phone instead of that tool. That means that we have less demand for somebody to make the aluminum frame for the level, less demand for people to make the little glass bulbs in it. We don't have the need for as many people to assemble the unit, to pack it and ship it, and retail stores to buy and sell it. So every time we download a mobile app, we're eliminating a piece of a job. It's a very tiny piece, but when we're downloading billions upon billions of mobile apps, that's causing what's called technological unemployment. So at the same time that we're automating all these jobs out of existence, we're actually freeing up lots of human capital. But just because there aren't enough jobs doesn't mean that we've suddenly run out of work to do in the world. That's kind of a preposterous thought. There will always be work to do in the world. But whether or not there are jobs lined up for the work that needs to be done is another matter. So when you ask this question, where do our next generation jobs come from? They'll come from some of our emerging new industries. So it's these future industries that we need to focus on and actually empower them and create new future industries as well. So when Mark Andreessen talks about software is eating the world, that's actually what's going on. We're actually creating this digital information infrastructure over everything physical in the world. A lot of it's happening through the Internet of Things. Now, the Internet of Things, Cisco predicted that the Internet of Things happened somewhere between 2008 and 2009. That's when the number of devices connected to the Internet started to exceed the number of people on Earth. It was 6.8 billion people on Earth at that time. It's over 6.8 billion devices. Projections now are that by 2020, we're going to exceed 50 billion things connected to the internet. So what are all of these things? Last year in Silicon Valley, they had a special event called the Trillion Sensor Summit. This was put on by Fairchild Semiconductor. And they were charged with putting together a roadmap as to how long it would be before we reach 1 trillion sensors in the world. Their projection is that we will reach 1 trillion sensors in the world in 2024, and by 2036 we will have 100 trillion sensors in the world. What this means is that sensors get to be very tiny, very inexpensive, very easy to produce, And these are sensors that can sense everything from temperature to chemical composition to humidity levels, everything we can think of. So we will be embedding sensors into all kinds of coatings like paints and powder coatings, and we'll have sensors on the sides of our cars, on the sides of our buildings, on the sides of bridges. We will be getting information from everywhere. As a result of this, innovation is being parsed into far smaller pieces, and everybody gets to participate. This is referred to as the democratization of innovation. Everything's being democratized so everybody can participate. Now there's a special category of these smart objects, these Internet of Things objects called enchanted objects. And I find these to be quite fascinating because it gives an idea of this intelligence that we're able to build into the world around us. So I'll just go through a few of these. The Amazon trash can, as an example, is one that when you throw away a product, it will automatically scan the barcode on that product and reorder it and have it delivered to your home. So Amazon really likes this product here. The Memo.me smart mirror is one that when you're trying on clothes, it will actually record your images, so then when you try on a new outfit, you can compare it to your last outfit that you tried on. The Vitality Glow Cap is one that's designed to remind you of the medicines you're supposed to take. If you're supposed to take something at 9 o'clock in the morning and you don't take it, the cap will start flashing on top. If you still don't take it, it'll start chirping, making noises. If you still don't take it, it'll start sending you text messages. So this thing will nag you until you take your pills. The ambient umbrella is very cool. It's a very smart object that knows what the weather is going to be. So if you have your umbrella by the front door and it knows that it's going to be raining later that day, it'll start flashing the light on the handle to remind you to take your umbrella with you. This is the Flying Nixie camera. I love this one because it's a wearable device. It looks kind of like a watch that you're wearing, but you can just unlatch it, unfold it, and it turns into a flying drone that you can control with your smartphone, and then you can proceed to go spy on your neighbors if you want to. This is the biometric coffee maker, and again, another really smart product that you put your hand on it in the morning, it knows exactly how much caffeine should be in your coffee, or how much sweetener should go into it. Probably has a setting for how much whiskey should go into it too. These are the smart chopsticks that were developed by Baidu. They actually can, when you're using them, they can tell whether or not your food is safe to eat. The Pinto Feed pet feeder enables you to remotely feed your pet from a distance. So if you're at the office, you can feed your pet, and then while your pet is eating, you can then FaceTime your pet and have a conversation with your pet while they're eating. So when Vinod Khosla talks about big data is going to eliminate the need for 80% of all doctors, what he's referring to is these type of technologies. These micro skin patches that are very smart technologies that are sensing all kinds of information given off by your body. These type of technologies are coming about everywhere and are giving us a lot more information on how to deal with our conditions. 3D printing is another, is changing the world. This is Charles Hull. He's the gentleman that actually invented the first 3D printer back in the mid-1980s. Originally, we could print in just a few objects. Now we can print in over 300 materials, including concrete and ceramics and metals, foods, biological structures. We're scaling up 3D printers so they can print things that are very large items. This is a car that was actually printed all the way from the wheels all the way to the top of the car, printed by Local Motors. It took them 44 hours to print the entire car. Sometime in the near future, when you go and buy clothing, the first thing you will do is step into a body scanner. So you step into the body scanner, it gets you all the measurements off your body, and then you just pick out whatever styles, fashions, colors you're interested in, and you can print out your clothes right there on the spot. This is actual 3D printed clothing, very complicated fashions and styles, things that you can't create with traditional fabrics. Lots of interesting designs here. And it's not just our clothing, we will also be able to print our shoes. So once you scan your feet in, your shoes will fit perfect every time. I mean, how cool is that? The bottom one here is actually a cast. If somebody breaks their arm, you can actually get a cast that is designed specifically for your arm. These shoe printers are out there, they're being used. They're not ready for prime time just yet, but very soon. Contour crafting is a form of 3D printing, only it's working with like ceramics and concrete. Now this is starting off giving a demonstration on how to creating one layer upon another layer of ceramics. In just a little bit it'll be switching over to concrete. Now there's been a competition going on around the world to see who can actually print the first house. Print a complete house. And there's a group, that's a Dutch group, there's one in London, there's one in Southern California. Now it's going to switch over here, and this is printing with fast drying concrete that is fiberglass reinforced. And they are essentially printing a wall. And so if you can imagine a concrete pumper that's pumping material into this thing, and it's putting one layer upon another layer, and it's drying very fast. Now you can see the zigzag reinforcement in the middle there. So I said that there was a competition to see who could be first to print the first house, and as it turns out, it was actually Winsun, a Chinese group, that not only did they print the first house, they actually printed 10 houses in one day for an average price of less than $5,000 US money. This is the CEO of the company. He said something real interesting, that he's been working on this for 10 years. And he said before they printed these houses, he actually printed his entire factory, which was around 10,000 square meters. He said it took him 30 days. He said that was a lot of work. So this works, with their technology works very, very much like what I just showed you there. So the Holy Grail is we would like to print houses like this. We set up a rig on a site, and we can print the entire house in less than a day. So sometime in the near future, if you get tired of your house, you'll just be able to grind it up and reprint it. You don't even have to clean it first. If you think that's so far-fetched, this is a company that's making house printers. It's a Slovenian company called Bet Abrams, and they're selling these house printers for 16,000 US dollars, and you can print your own house. So what are you waiting for? Once we're able to print houses, we no longer have the need for flat walls. Every wall can become an artistic centerpiece. We can become very creative. Architects are going to love this because they can create all these free-form structures and different types of buildings that are inconceivable by today's construction methods. And incidentally, you can print with concrete, you can print with glass, you can print with steel, and create these amazing structures. We won't even know what houses look like in the future. And it's just a matter of scale before we're able to scale up and print really large objects, like printing an entire ship or a baseball stadium or a hospital or a floating island. I love floating islands. Bioprinting is a form of 3D printing that works with organic material. This is 3D printed skin for burn victims. This guy's printing a human vein for surgery. This young boy has a prosthetic arm that was all created on a 3D printer. because we're able to allow the people that are using the prosthetic limbs to make their own limbs, we can get much more creative. They can design something that fits their personality. And that's exactly what's happening. This young girl has an exoskeleton on that gives her this wide range of movement that she never had before. This is Lee Cronin. He's a professor at Glasgow University. He believes that we're going to be able to print all of our pharmaceutical drugs. So think of this as replacing an entire drugstore or pharmacy and putting in a prescription that the doctor gives you, and it automatically prints out the pills that you need. If you think this is so far-fetched, this is actually a pill printer made in Belgium that prints pills. It doesn't work the way Lee Cronin wants it to just yet, but it will print the pills, and it also prints the packaging for the pills as well. Very soon we'll be printing, the Chinese have kind of spearheaded a lot of this, printing everything from bladders to kidneys to livers to ears. We haven't printed an entire heart yet, but close to it. Craig Ventnor says that we will soon be printing antibodies and new life forms. And I like to ask the question of how long before we can print an entire replacement body for ourselves. So at this point, we haven't got the technology. If somebody gets their finger cut off, we can't print a replacement finger and have it attachable. That will be coming pretty soon, though. This is going off, the 3D printing is going off in 1,000 different directions, creating lots of opportunities. And there's also printed food. This is kind of weird stuff for a lot of people. Sometime in the future, your spouse will go off to the store to get a new printer cartridge so you can print dinner tonight. NASA's very interested in 3D printing because there's no indigenous food supplies on Mars or the moon, so they actually held a pizza competition to see who could print a pizza. This was one of the entries in that competition. These 3D food printers are kind of coming out of the woodwork. This is 3D printed hamburgers, 3D printed chickpea snacks, 3D printed raviolis, corn chips, sugar cubes. There's a company that actually will scan your face in and print your face in chocolate. It tastes so much better when it looks like you. Think of all the apples that fall off of an apple tree. Most of the apples are damaged and bruised, so they get thrown away. But what if we could take that same apple stock and reprint it into a perfect apple every time? Not only is it a perfect apple, you can also eat the stem and the core and the leaf because it's all printed out of the same material. Only you happen to like almond flavoring, so we could add almond flavoring in. You need more vitamin D in your diet. Well, we could do that. Every Wednesday, you happen to like blue apples. Well, we could do that as well. So would you buy a product if it said it was naturally grown, completely organic, printed food? Does that sound like a crazy slogan? Very soon, you will have companies that are first printing the can, and then they will print the soup that goes in it. Or they will print the bottle, and then they will print the wine that goes in it. When Chris Anderson says 3D printing is going to be bigger than the internet, the economy for the physical world is 5 to 6 times larger than the digital world. So I actually happen to agree with that. This can grow up, and it's going off into lots of different directions. The opportunities are absolutely huge. Driverless cars are entering our minds in unique and different ways. This is Google has been pushing the envelope on it. They're experimenting with these really simple cars to get everything tested out. Virtually every car company in the world has a driverless division working in the background. We're going to, if you think about, maybe 10, 15 years from now, you step out in front of your house, you pull out your smartphone, you punch in, I want to go to work, I want to go to school, I want to go shopping. A driverless car will pick you up, take you to where you want to go, drop you off, and from there it'll pick somebody else up, take them to where they want to go. And so these things will be in circulation all the time. We'll be transitioning from car companies selling the driver experience, because we'll stop driving cars to the rider experience, because we'll be more interested in what we can do while we're riding. This is a more efficient way to travel. We can actually get work done, or we can enjoy ourselves while we're traveling. This is actually what an intersection will look like in the driverless era, kind of the way India looks right now. Sometime between 2030 and 2035, I'm predicting that we will have roads that'll be designated as driverless only. These are roads that, unless your car has driverless mode that you can switch it into, you won't be allowed to get onto. Now, once you get onto these roads, then everything will be positioned much closer together, side by side, front and back, and everything will go much faster. That will make our transportation systems way more efficient. Flying drones. Flying drones are associated a lot with all the military stuff, dropping bombs, but there's lots of good uses for drones. Amazon announced they're going to be delivering packages with drones. A lot of companies are testing this out. This is a French company that's delivering newspapers with drones. This is a burrito bomber that you can order burritos delivered to you, and it'll drop them out with a parachute that comes down into your waiting arms. This company has actually taken it a step further. They're delivering food right to the table of a restaurant and having the drone do that. And what can possibly go wrong when you have chopsticks and flying blades right next to it? This is what everybody needs, our emergency beer drone. Agriculture is using drones in lots of different ways. They're using everything from quadricopters to fixed wing to helicopter drones, and they're making several passes over a field to detect the insect counts on the field, how much moisture is in the field, fertilizer levels, diseases, and things like that. We will use drones for emergency rescue. Rather than put people in harm's way, these things can be out there very fast to start finding if there's somebody stuck in a snowbank or something. The news organizations, every time there's a major incident somewhere in a city or around the country, they will send out a drone to start getting footage of what's going on there. Cities will be sending in drones to get eyes on whenever there's an emergency call. The first response will be to get eyes on it. And then they can formulate a better response. We have the potential to eliminate forest fires completely. We can have drones that are with heat sensors that are determining whether or not there's any small fires happening inside of a forest. And rather than waiting, small fires are easy to put out. So rather than waiting for them to turn into massive big blazes, we can send in a fire extinguisher drone that puts it out right away. So when Pete Diamandis talks about moving from a world with 2 billion connected to the internet in 2010 to 7 billion in 2020, he's actually talking about these solar-powered drones that are going to be flying at a very high altitude. Google just bought the company Titan, and Facebook bought one called Ascenta. These fly at altitudes that are so high that they're above the weather patterns, they're above all the air traffic, and they work as low-flying satellites or high-flying cell towers. And their plan is to provide Wi-Fi to the other 3 billion people on the planet. Ultra-high-speed transportation is being worked on in a couple different ways. Elon Musk, a few months back, announced his plans for creating the Hyperloop. Daryl Oster, who's actually going to be over here in Seoul in a couple weeks, is working on ET3, which is evacuated tube transportation. Now what this is these are tubes that they take all of the air out, so it's a vacuum, and then they put a maglev track on the bottom, so the capsules, there's no friction whatsoever, or very little friction, as it travels through there. So they can achieve speeds of up to 6,000 kilometers an hour as they're traveling through these. So the idea is to build these tubes as a new form of transportation around the globe. So we're, to put this in perspective, we're currently shipping more things through tubes today than transporting any other way. We're providing water through tubes, we have oil and gas through tubes, we have sewage going through tubes. So why not people and freight? It actually seems like a logical extension of that. So ET3 is working on prototypes and a pilot project that you can get into and travel all over the world. And it's projected that we could actually travel all the way from Washington to Seoul in less than 2 hours with one of these tube transportation systems. So think about this in the future. We become a very fluid society. It's very possible that we will have people eating breakfast in Seoul, eating lunch in London, and having dinner in Toronto. That's entirely possible. This also has the potential, when all these jobs are going away, this has the potential for being one of those big job creators. This has the potential for being the largest infrastructure project in the entire world as we build these tube networks everywhere. It's a 50-year build-out, if not longer, massive new infrastructure, and employing hundreds of millions of people all over the world. So future education. Shifting gears here a little bit, by 2030, half of all the traditional colleges are going to disappear. There's lots of problems happening, so that doesn't mean we're going to need less education. It means that traditional colleges are going to have a hard time adapting. To define the problem, we need to prepare students for jobs that don't exist, using technologies that haven't been invented to solve problems that we don't even know are problems yet. That pretty much sums it all up. So in February, Facebook bought the company Oculus Rift. Now, for those of you who don't know what this is, Oculus Rift is a virtual reality goggles that you put over your eyes, and it immerses you into this totally different world. And it's a very compelling tool because it creates these realistic new environments for you to go into. They're actually creating these 3D treadmills, 360-degree treadmills for you to walk in these environments, so it feels like you're immersed in that environment. Now, as soon as Facebook bought Oculus Rift, there was an instant uptick in the demand for virtual reality designers, engineers, and programmers. And nobody's teaching that. Nobody's teaching it, at least not in the Oculus Rift version of it. So bold companies are instantly triggering the need for talented people to grow with cutting-edge industries. So every time somebody makes a large acquisition like this, this sparks a demand for new talent around the world. Now, what we've been working on at the Da Vinci Institute is micro-colleges. Now, by 2030, we're projecting that the average worker will have to reboot their skills 6 times. This means that our jobs are going to transition very quickly. People get burned out and they have to reboot their skills very quickly. Now, micro-colleges are an immersive form of post-secondary education designed around short periods of time. So for somebody who wants to reboot their skills, they want to do it in the least amount of time possible. That's what makes traditional colleges a poor fit. So it's no longer possible to predict the needs of business 4 to 5 years in advance. Micro-colleges become this responsive mechanism, this tool for actually getting in on the messy front end and creating the talent that's needed for business whenever it's needed. At the Da Vinci Institute, we run our own micro-college called Da Vinci Coders, and so we're training computer programmers. It's a 13-week course, and they get started in over a 13-week period. They have enough skills to leave there and get an entry-level job in the industry. They leave with a certificate, and they're good to go. So we're actually viewing micro-colleges as a new mechanism, a responsive mechanism that can go off in, again, 1,000 different directions. Everything from designing parts for 3D printers to crowdfunding academies, dog breeders, universities, brewmasters for colleges, drone pilots, aquaponics farmers, urban agriculturalists. This can go off in lots of different directions, and people can get very creative with this. As Mark Twain says, a man who carries a cat by the tail learns something he can learn in no other way. The future is ours to write. I'll end with a few predictions here. The Internet of Things will virtually eliminate theft because everything of value in our life we can tag, so we can track it at any given time. What would actually probably happen is just create a higher caliber of criminal, though. The world's first trillionaire will come from emerging cryptocurrency movement. Driverless cars will change transportation as dramatically as the invention of the automobile itself. By 2030, the average person will own printed clothing, will live in a printed house, will have packages delivered by drones, will own more than one robot, will work as a freelancer, frequently use driverless cars, will be 3 times more educated than the average person today, and will be capable of accomplishment 100 times more than the average person today. So we are entering into a period of unprecedented opportunity. Why is this period so important? Humanity's going to change more over the next 20 years than in all human history. At the same time, risk factors are going to increase exponentially. And our children's children who haven't even been born yet are counting on you. That's everyone here in this audience. As Steve Jobs says, right now is one of those moments when you are influencing the world. But sometimes our best efforts just look a lot like this. Yeah, pretty much just like that. As Thomas Edison says, opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. So for any of you that like more information about what we're doing at the Da Vinci Institute, feel free to sign up for a free newsletter or to contact Youngsook, who's establishing Da Vinci Korea. So I thank you very much for having me here today.
First, let me say how honored I am to be here today at the Global HR Forum, how wonderful it is to be in South Korea. When I told my teenagers I was going to Korea, they got very nervous because they all thought I was heading to Pyongyang. But it's really an honor to be here, and it's also a real honor to be on a panel with Tom, whose work is known throughout the world and is truly one of the global influencers in the futurology business. And a special thanks to Professor Youngsook Park, who is simply a force of nature. She has pulled this panel together and is doing very important work on futurology that I will turn to momentarily. Now, my use of this PowerPoint may look like that car that Tom just showed. We'll see how well this comes off. Okay, here you go. See? Proof. Now I'm probably going to turn I'm probably going to hit a button and music is going to start playing. Ah, there it goes. Okay, great. Okay, since 2012, moviegoers around the world, their imagination was captured by Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games, which set box office records talking about a post-apocalyptic future. In the nature of Panem, country which has reinforced for millions the contemptuous nature of closed society. And this is a future where there's abject misery, mass poverty, but the anthem of the nation declares, or the anthem of Panem declares, one horn of plenty for all. The darkness is the light, one horn of plenty is for all. And to the observers of autocracies, this propaganda has a very familiar ring, especially here, as we're just a few miles away from the DMZ. In the anthem of Panem, we see the incongruence between cornucopia and actual destitution set in a technological future. Though this is science fiction, Hunger Games testifies to the enduring importance of democratic governance in channeling technological advances reasonably. And in this context, and as a committed cornucopian, I'd like to take the opportunity today to speak for the awesome power of technology and the responsibilities we have to marshal that power for the good of the world. Now, my thoughts today are inspired by a very special man, a man named Herman Kahn. Herman Kahn was the founder of Hudson Institute. He was one of the most influential public intellectuals of a 25-year period that essentially ran from the late 1950s until his untimely death in 1983. Herman Kahn was a great genius, a man who was very much a futurist, a man who understood very simply that the world was going to undergo dynamic change, that there were people who, most people around Kahn didn't have the strategic foresight to imagine how the world could be incredibly different 20 years from now than it is today. And Kahn stood up in the United States at a time, numerous times, when there was great fear, for example, of nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. Kahn worked through highly detailed scenarios to look at what fighting a nuclear war would look like. And he did so in order to best prepare for nuclear war, which was to make, the idea being, try to limit the damage as far as possible so that there would be no need for the Soviets to try to attack the United States. And one of Kahn's big themes was thinking about the unthinkable, to try to imagine the unimaginable. And this is very positive consequences when you try to think through what the future might look like today, looking 20 years, 50 years out the future. And it also has negative consequences when you try to think through a nuclear war and you try to imagine what nuclear fallout would look like and what humankind would be like if, for example, the Soviets took out Chicago, we then took out Kiev, and they took out New York, we would take out Moscow, and suddenly much of developed civilization would move, as Kahn predicted, into coal mines to try to limit the damage from nuclear fallout. So Kahn had this great ability to think massively creatively about what the future might look like, and he was known for a number of things in the United States. In 1962, he was doing a study for the Pentagon on Japanese defense issues, and Kahn realized that for the last few years, Japan's defense had been growing at, Japan's economy had been growing at 8% a year for the last few years and was likely to continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Kahn at that point figured out that Japan would have the world's second largest economy and would be an economic superstate, and he wrote this book, The Emerging Japanese Superstate, that became a bestseller in Japan and the United States, and it gave the Japanese immense confidence to face the future. Kahn also wrote a book called The Year 2000 in 1967, in which he predicted a world of network computers, of portable telephones, of these kind of tubes that people would use to do tourism in the 21st century, quite similar to what Tom showed us. And Kahn predicted a world of prosperity, both in the developed and also in the developing world, which he thought was key, that the developing world would leapfrog through technological advances. And along the way, Kahn came to know the president of Korea, General Park Chung-hee, President Park Chung-hee, and they struck an immense friendship, an immense partnership. Kahn came to Korea more than 20 times in his life, and he would arrive in Seoul, would almost immediately get off the plane and go to meet with President Park. They would spend a dozen hours together having very intense conversations, and Kahn's basic argument was that Korea had the human capital and the capability to move from a society that is agricultural and sustainable to basically what I would call the Samsung economy, to a knowledge economy, that Korea had to jump ahead of the information revolution and it had the opportunity to do so. And Kahn came eventually to believe that Korea actually would have a much brighter economic future than Japan, which he thought was plagued by structural economic problems which Japan still faces today. And so one of the reasons why I'm here, in addition to speaking at this great conference, is that we are launching an important new book, and this is Professor Youngsook Park's new book on Herman Kahn that's coming out that tells this important story about Herman Kahn his view of the future, and his story about Herman Kahn in South Korea, which is little known. And this is a very important book that will be out at the end of the year, and I want to urge everyone to get it, to read it carefully. And I want to salute Professor Park for this wonderful book, and now I just need to find a little device here. I am not Herman Kahn. I am technologically challenged in every way. And here they are sitting. That's Bob Pernero. Here we go. So let me begin by returning to one of Kahn's. So Kahn had this great view of the future. He had this amazing ability to put things in the broadest historical perspective. And what this meant was Kahn always rejected academic hierarchy because he thought people simply repeated what other people were saying and that they failed to see groundbreaking developments around them. And it's why he predicted the rise of Japan and the rise of South Korea when others absolutely missed it. And one of Kahn's great theory was that people tend to make projections, linear projections from moments of crisis that extend, that assume that conditions will remain the same and that crises can only get worse. And Kahn's favorite example to cite was Thomas Malthus, the famous English economist from the end of the 18th century, at a time when the world had about 900 million people, most living in squalor, and life expectancy was short. And Malthus believed that if the rate of population growth remained unchecked, that mankind would face either mass starvation or wars over food and other natural resources. And his belief was that population would continue to grow geometrically while food production could only grow arithmetically. And this Malthusian theme has been with us ever since. It shows its face today in many ways. And economic planners always have these Malthusian scenarios that they work from. But the truth is we've avoided Malthus's tipping point. With a commitment to human freedom and good governance, we're likely to do so for quite some time. Today, we're feeding 7.2 billion people without a food crisis. And part of this is because Malthus predicted population would double every 25 years. It actually took 123 years to go from 1 billion to 2 billion people. And as we're seeing, fertility drops as nations become more advanced. But even more importantly than population trends, Malthus underestimated human ingenuity, human capital, which is really the key to the future. Agricultural technology is key. It allowed food production to outpace population production. Global food production increased 60% from 1938 to the 1950, and it more than doubled from the 1950s to 2001. And this is along the lines of a long stream of technological advances. Human progress has been key to replacing human labor and with machine and improving living standards, from the domestication of plants and animals in the Paleolithic era to today's computers. Technology has kept us ahead of and robots. Today's technology has kept us ahead of the population curve. Instead of population increasing geometrically, it's technology that's increased exponentially, and thanks to democratization, the process of innovation is accelerating at an unbelievable pace. Now, can innovation continue to help us escape Malthus? We've got several major milestones ahead on the world stage. World population could exceed 10 billion by 2050. This is a UN estimate. I suspect it's a little high because of this trend in developing countries where people tend to have fewer children. 90% of the growth is forecast for Africa and Asia, and this would be an increase in world population of 2 Chinas and 2 United States. And so now the neo-Malthusians claim that we really do face major challenges, and there are all sorts of famous economists. I'll cite the American biologist, population biologist Paul Ehrlich in the United States, who argues that climate change and resource depletion will limit the Earth's carrying capacity. He's been saying this for decades now, and he's been just universally wrong. And he's been predicting severe political, economic, social consequences, extrapolating from, say, the famines in Biafra in Africa in the late 60s, early 70s. Now, we definitely face massive demographic challenges, which I'm going to turn to in a second, and technological challenges, but we shouldn't underestimate human resourcefulness. I think we will easily, in the end, be able to handle the challenges of population growth, even though feeding, housing, and clothing 80 million new people a year, and it's going to take an awful lot of those printers. And I have to confess, I'm one of those people. If I ever tried to print a house, I would probably get something jammed in the feeder that would cause disaster. But feeding, housing, and clothing 80 million new people a year is an immense challenge. It's not going to be easy, but I think we can do it. Looking at the demographics and the future of the workforce, it's clear to keep in mind its geographic distribution. Over the next 30 years, growth is almost certainly going to occur primarily in developing nations, letting alone immigration, which will occur. The fastest growth is going to occur in Africa, where population is set to double by 2050 from 1.1 to 2.4 billion, and almost all of that growth, as you can imagine, is in sub-Saharan Africa. India is likely to grow to 1.7 billion people and be larger than China, be the world's most populous country. Urbanization. We also face an immense urbanization challenge. More than 3 billion people are going to be moving into cities. This is actually a good story. Agriculture requires fewer and fewer people, and cities tend to be a place for greater creativity, greater human interaction. It's amazing. When Malthus was alive, only 3 out of 100 people lived in cities. Today, it's about 53% of the population. By 2050, it's going to be 80% of humanity, city dwellers. And you just look here at Korea and look at Seoul and look at what it was 25, 30, 40 years ago, and you sort of get a sense of what the future of the world is going to look like. Now, a lot of the urban expansion is going to be in places like Nigeria and China. Here's a chart just detailing China's urbanization, which is going to occur very rapidly. The real question becomes how to deal with this urbanization. Obviously, the urbanization can cause massive, significant problems we're seeing in the inner cities. We saw in the inner cities in the United States, which are improving, as you see in the suburbs in many cities in Europe, where poverty, disenchanted youth join radical Muslim groups and detach themselves from society, engage in violent behavior. There are significant challenges urbanization poses, especially if you have large groups of young men unemployed or underemployed. That are major challenges that have to be handled very, very sensibly. You have to obviously be sure to avoid creating slums and mass poverty. But the other thing that becomes interesting, and is even, here's a look at India's urbanization, which is growing rapidly, and India has massive infrastructure problems, some of which will be solved by drones, undoubtedly by tubes and other things that other yet to be invented technologies that will make things better and allow India to leapfrog some of its technological challenges. But the real big challenge we face around the world is the fact there's global aging. People everywhere are living much longer. In fact, by some estimates, by 2050, we may enjoy a life expectancy of 120 on average. You look back, as the chart notes, in Sweden in 1800, the average person lived to be 32. Today, they live to be 83. India life expectancy in the last half century went up from 38 to 64. In China, from 41 to 73. And the facts on life expectancy really are quite remarkable. To be sure, much of the increase in life expectancy has occurred in the developed world, but now it's occurring in the developing world, and we're also seeing, along with it, the spread of chronic disease in the developing world. People used to die before they were 35, so you didn't have to worry about cancer, diabetes, heart disease, but that's no longer the case and is becoming a significant health challenge and something that's keeping Dr. Kim, whom we heard from earlier this morning, his colleagues at the World Bank and former colleagues at the WHO quite busy. And just a look at the growth in life expectancy at birth, which is increasing at quite an impressive rate going forward. Now, what this means is there's going to be a global increase in the number of senior citizens. Now, of course, as those of us approach seniorhood. I have to confess, I celebrated my 53rd birthday here in Seoul yesterday. I didn't really celebrate it, but it was my 53rd birthday when I was a kid. I thought 53 was old. I thought 65 was really old. And I thought that 75 was ancient. And I look around today at colleagues, people I know, who are quite active in professional life and quite busy. The long-term planner for the U.S. Pentagon, Andrew Marshall, who runs the Office of Net Assessment, which is the Pentagon's in-house think tank, and an old friend of Herman Kahn's. Andy is finally retiring at age 93. And if you look at Andy, Andy doesn't look a day over 70. He is in amazing shape, and I think we're going to start to see this as people take better care of themselves as they age, as we get a better sense of what's available, and also as we develop new technologies that will allow us to track our health, all sorts of sensors that will allow us to get a better sense of what it is we need to do to stay younger. And this is just in the area of traditional, what I would call the traditional practice of medicine, not even getting into all the biotechnological, nanotechnological, printing of organs and other things that are going to make things change much greater before too long. So we've had this global gray shift, and we're going from 531 million seniors today to 1.5 billion in 2050. Seniors are going to double in the American population from 41 to 86 million, and whereas people who are from 25 to 54 are only going to grow by 2%. So in the United States, we're going to need to take advantage of the human capital of this older population, which is going to be healthier, which is going to want to be intellectually active, which is going to want to be engaged in the workforce, and we're going to need to make sure that they take part as well in the workforce. And we're seeing similar trends throughout the world. Everyone knows that about the diminution of the workforce in Japan because of its aging. South Korea is going to begin to face similar challenges beginning in 2016. Elder populations in China, Singapore, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and India are also going to grow drastically. So there's a gray shift going on. A gray shift that will give us more seasoned workers, but we really do need to figure out how to engage people in the workforce. Today, American seniors, about 18% of them take part in the workforce. By 2020, we're expected that 30% of American seniors are going to want to take part in the workforce, or 30% of seniors between 65 and 74. And we're probably going to see similar trends in Canada, Russia, South Korea, and other countries. So, and what makes things interesting is that social safety net programs, as we all know, are going to face major challenges due to these demographic pressures as we have far larger people in the retirement cohort. And we're going to need to figure out how to rebalance things, because there's no reason why someone should retire necessarily at 65 if they don't want to. And there's no reason necessarily for them to receive social, particularly if they're very wealthy, social transfer payments to support themselves if they're choosing to work. When we start to live to be 120, retiring at 65 will cause massive boredom for many people who, though not all of us may have the energy of Professor Park, nonetheless, I think a lot of us will be bored sitting at home. So we're going to need to figure out how to recalibrate the retirement work scenario. Now, there are other factors that fit in as well. The future workforce is going to include hundreds of millions of women around the world who are entering the workforce much more significantly. It'll also involve temporary part-time workers who are going to increase in numbers. Workers are going to become more mobile, and all of this is going to create a rapidly changing workforce, making talent management a top priority for companies and organizations alike. And as Tom pointed out, we're going to see a massive shift in the current and the way that companies, on which companies are important. As we're now in this downward slope on the bell curve, we'll see the rise of new, more horizontal companies that'll be less hierarchical, And all of these things will play out as we move towards more of a maker era where we can engage in 3D printing and manufacture more things for ourselves rather than relying on labor in China and elsewhere. So we've gone through a description of the demographic challenges facing our future workforce, and I'd like to pair that with the challenges and opportunities presented by technology. And it's obviously very hard to predict what the technologies of the future are like. We're getting a real glimpse on the incredible things that Tom highlighted. What's clear is that technological change brings massive sociological change. You've seen it here in Korea. We've seen it for all of mankind from the beginning, the domestication of plants and animals, through plowing, through genetically modified organisms. And they all transform the world. They transform us as human beings. We've seen the liberation of so much of the agricultural world, particularly you look at China where people have left the farm to go work in these big factories in Shenzhen where they're making iPhones and iPads. We're going to start to see similar shifts in Africa and other parts of Asia, which is where 95% of the world's agricultural population live. 1.5 to 2 billion farmers are going to leave their land for the cities. This is an incredible shift of 1.5 to 2 billion people leaving by 2050. And we're going to have to figure out how to absorb these people, to integrate this labor surplus. It's going to be a serious challenge. China faces this, and it poses major domestic problems on a daily basis in the People's Republic, talking about domestic inabilities. Now, there are all sorts of disruptive technologies that are going to arise. I won't go through them, but as Tom did an excellent job looking at it. But we're about to, okay, slide I should have shown before here, just the green revolution. I'll pass through this. And then we're about to enter into a new sort of age of cognitive technology. Some people are calling this the second machine age, where smart machines like supercomputers, robots are not only going to take over manual functions, which they have, such as car assembly, but they're all increasingly going to focus, and printing houses, increasingly focus on mental processes. And the combination of these technologies, particularly cognitive technologies, are going to be fundamentally different from the previous shifts that were triggered by horsepower, steam power, electrical power, because this new technology is going to generate enormous and frankly unpredictable brain power. Now, there are so many revolutionary technologies out there that are going to bend the curve of human history. They're not even on our radar screens yet, because we can't even begin to imagine the kind of brain power that it's going to take to create these new technologies. I know that these new technologies will boost humanity to an unprecedented degree and allow us to fundamentally improve our physical and intellectual environment, but they do pose challenges. These technologies, if they get into the wrong hands, if they're misused, can reinforce tyrannies, can cause great inequality between people. Some people having the ability to do just having far greater power than their fellow man because of their access to new kinds of technologies. There are important moral and theological questions that we need to ask as we look at some of these technologies. And we have to keep these in mind. These are difficult moral dilemmas that we will each have to face as members of democratic societies. Now, creative destruction, and Tom's quote about the 2 billion jobs out there that are going to be lost is one of the most widely quoted on the internet. When you look at this, 47% of all jobs are likely to be lost to robots, according to an Oxford research team in the next, and automation in the next 20 years. And a lot of people with the wrong work skill set could be left behind, especially during a period of massive demographic change. And even jobs that require human creativity could be threatened. Tom talked about the journalists whose jobs are going to be replaced by machines. Now, for the journalists present, that wasn't me who said that. That was him. No. But But it is true that all sorts of white-collar jobs now will be replaced, and jobs that require human creativity. Ray Kurzweil, Google's director of engineering, has predicted that cognitive technology will enable computers to possess the same intelligence as humans by 2029, and then surpass us shortly thereafter. He predicts by 2045 we're going to reach the technological singularity, where progress is so rapid it outstrips our human ability to understand it. We'll be hearing a lot about this tomorrow. But in such an environment, it's definitely possible that machines may replace workers much more comprehensively than possible. The challenge for us is to figure out ways that we can empower individuals and to make this transformation such that it creates new and better job opportunities for all of us. We need to navigate a difficult transition towards an increasingly technological world, but if we do it right, we can have more abundance, more variety in our consumption, and lead longer lives. Now, of course, there's been great skepticism about new technologies whenever they've been introduced. In the 18th century in Britain, the spinning jenny was destroyed by the wool working industry. In the 19th century, farmers destroyed new agricultural technology. And so technological frictions are real. They're a living problem for us we need to deal with, but we have to remember that we've made huge transitions in this past century. The U.S. managed to shift farm employment from 90% of total labor force to less than 2% with minimal social disruption over a period of slightly more than 100 years, and South Korea has made this unbelievable transition to being the third largest economy in Asia and punching far above its weight when it comes to technological innovation. Now, one of the greatest challenges we're going to face as we head into this future is human enhancement technology through either genetic modification, device implementation. Technology may allow us to fundamentally alter ourselves, creating a class of supermen and superwomen. They may be programmed to possess extraordinary physical skills and enhanced intellect, enabling them to handle treacherous physical environments and recall vast amounts of information from memory. Now here, I think that this is a place where massive moral dilemmas are posed. I think almost all of humankind would agree that it's a wonderful thing that you can print a hand for a boy who has lost his hand, and you can take people who are less fortunate and bring them up to the same level as the rest of humanity, using the genius of technology to equalize things for the handicapped. But going beyond that poses a significant challenge, and it's on many levels of the greatest kinds of human inequalities that we can't even imagine today could be out there, and this could pose challenges for societies. So I think we need to be fully aware of the emergence of technologies, fully understand it, conduct serious research on how to prevent technologies from being abused, and it's important that we preserve the core values of humanity, which is dignity, compassion, diversity, while seizing on potential human rights, new promise that new technologies allow. Now, to meet these challenges, and they're massive, we need to think about the unthinkable, to sort of imagine and do the undoable. And we have so many opportunities for us ahead. If we're going to try to feed 9 to 10 billion people by 2050, we're going to have to increase food production by 70%, and in the process appropriate 100 million new hectares of land. And we've done an amazing job in the last 50 years. World population has more than doubled, but cultivated land has only increased by 12%. And this is thanks to high-yield agriculture, modern agricultural technology. Food production has increased several-fold. Today, we're only using 11% of the world's surface to feed 7.2 billion people, and there's still plenty of arable land out there for cultivation. Africa has 50% of the world's unused arable land, and this can be used for food production. to feed the world's fastest growing region while creating $1 trillion in additional income by 2030, I apologize. Africa can duplicate the Chinese economic, agricultural miracle and help bring people out of abject poverty. And in China, it really was good governance and technology that allowed China to move from the disasters of the Cultural Revolution, mass starvation, badly run state agriculture to greater macroeconomic stability and the use of new technologies to greatly increase agricultural yield. If we can tackle corruption, promote market economics, guarantee private property, and commercialize agriculture, we have a great chance of helping meet the great needs of the future. Good governance will be essential, but technology, including the printing technologies that Tom showed us, will also help to meet rising demographic pressures at this time. Now, there are all sorts of technologies that will allow us to think ahead about the future. Here's one, which is one possibility to solve the problem of rapid urbanization would be to create floating islands off continents that could be self-sustaining, that could have water, plants, agriculture, schools, technology, attachment to the internet through the drones and the like that Google and others are buying. And by the way, I think it would be wonderful for the people of North Korea if we could get some of those drones up and provide them access to the internet from someplace above the atmosphere and allow them to have access to the great libraries of the world, which essentially anytime I travel in Africa, I am amazed at how things have changed and how people can stay in their homes in Africa, have access to the internet, and have access to the great libraries of the world. They don't have to travel to Paris or to London anymore to have access to all sorts of reading materials, and it's an incredible tool of empowerment. Another possibility is vertical farming, where you can produce crops year-round. You can build structures in major cities that are far more effective than actually current agricultural use of arable land. You conserve water, you eliminate runoff by using water again, and it drastically reduces pollution in major cities. And there can also be some striking buildings that would add to the architecture of the major new cities we're likely to see in India, China, Africa, and elsewhere. And there are all sorts of other new technologies out there. There's new kinds of nuclear power generation that can helium-cooled nuclear reactors that are quite small, that are much less expensive than current nuclear reactors, and that don't generate a significant amount of nuclear waste, since they allow nuclear fuel to be used up to 98%, so you don't have to worry about storage of nuclear fuel for hundreds or tens of thousands of years as we currently do. And so as we move forward, and these kind of small nuclear power generators can be used to power cities of millions of people, power these new cities if the technology is handled properly and at very reasonable cost. So in the future, we're going to need 100 billion animals to feed 10 billion people here. Today, 30% of the world's population is used for grazing, and a significant portion of grain is also used for animals. And so one of the ideas out there, and it's not yet a popular one, is to use cultured meat to feed the world. This was developed in Holland, not in the United States, everybody. But the idea is over time we can use tissue engineering to essentially synthesize high-quality meat that can be produced without costing the lives of animals, and eventually will be far cheaper, since you don't need to feed animals in order to produce this meat, and will provide an excellent source of protein, and will undoubtedly be extraordinarily nutritious coming out of your printer in the evening when you're home and sitting there. Or sitting in one of those vacuum tubes waiting to be transported somewhere. You can just hit the printer and get your own food rather than having the railway porter or the airline steward bring it to you. We do need, though, to, in all seriousness, to think about the future in very critical ways, and to think about the future of the workforce. What are these changes likely to mean? Let me try to wrap things up on the future workforce. I share the vision of many technological enthusiasts. I find Ray Kurzweil's ideas extraordinarily compelling, but I do think the singularity is probably further away than some here might argue. Robots can do a lot for us now, and they may be able to do a lot for us in 20 or 30 years, but they lack the entrepreneurial spirit and the self-interest and ingenuity of humans. They operate under frames we can design. Perhaps we can design new frames for these robots to make them more like humans, but I think in the end that there will be an intelligent symbiosis between robots and humans. Machines can't launch a startup, they can't inspire, they can't create, they can't effectively communicate, they can't demonstrate empathy, and they can't make key critical business decisions. So we'll have a new division of labor, launching startups, inspiring, innovating. All these things will belong to humans who will increasingly become entrepreneurial, especially as we develop higher order cognition. That will be quite helpful. Technology divergence is going to create jobs. Technology convergence, I've talked about, will have Tom really talked much more about it, will have mass-produced cheaper products, but divergence such as 3D printing, closet labs, those open source learning, community fabrication centers will empower individuals to make things on their own, to create, to be innovators on their own, and to make self-made products, both for themselves and for the rest of humanity, replacing factories in China and elsewhere. And human ingenuity, human creativity will be key, because people, as we approach the middle of the century, will be doing more and more of this themselves. We need a grand strategy to integrate the technological, economic, and social objectives with public policies to help meet this transition to the second machine age. What's key, I think, is we need to transition together to build a workforce that embraces innovation and new technologies and that focuses on higher order cognitive capacities. It's going to be we really probably do need to move away from the kind of hierarchical education system that World Bank President Kim criticized. We need to move towards a much more low hierarchy workplace that's going to require greater creativity and the need really to stay ahead of technology by constantly adapting through educational innovation. In short, we're going to need to overhaul higher education and prepare for advanced cognitive skills. We'll need a safety net. There are numerous features to it, but including giving frequent retraining for displaced workers. The challenges we face are very significant as we move towards the middle of the century, but these are no match for human ingenuity. I think that the future of mankind, if we handle the challenges properly with the right moral strictures and with knowing what kinds of technologies are likely to come up, will be very bright indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 감사합니다. 수많은 그 미래의 사회의 변화, 기술, 요인들을 말씀을 드렸습니다. 시간이 많지 않기 때문에 간단하게 여러분의 질문지도 제가 좀 받았고요. 토마스 프레이, you can hear it. 토마스 프레이 같은 경우에는 한 10가지를 소개를 했어요. 공기 중에서 물을 수확하는, 물 수확기가 나오면 수도관이 필요 없겠죠. 그래서 수자원공사도 추락할 수도 있고, 사물 인터넷 두 번째로 나오면 일적의 센서가 박혀서 도둑이 없어진다, 이런 것도 있고, QS라고 자가 헬스 모니터링, 이런 것들이 계속 우리에게 모든 신체 그 변화를 병원으로 직접 연결을 해서 인터넷 오브 싱스 같은 게 연결이 되면 의사 80%가 뭐 필요 없을 수도 있고 일자리를 잃어버릴 수도 있고, 3D 프린터가 나와가지고 44시간 만에 자동차를 프린트를 한다 그러면 지금 현재 제조업, 자동차 제조업이 어떻게 될 것인가. 그리고 집을 20시간 안에, 20시간 안에 집을 프린트를 해요. 그러면 우리가, 그리고 500만 원에 해줍니다. 어떻게 집을, 우리가 소유하고 있는 집값들은 어떻게 될 것인가. 무인 자동차가 나와서 뭐 10년, 15년 안에 모든 것이 변할 것이고, 무인기도 나오고, 진공열차가 6,000km로 달리면 항공산업, 자동차 산업, 택배 뭐 이런 것들이 얼마나 변할 것이며, 이런 수많은 변화들을 여러분들에게 지금 제시를 했고요. 켄 와인스타인 같은 경우에는 이제 이 인구 문제, 자원 고갈, 도시화, 도시의 지금 대도시 슬럼화도 걱정을 하고 있는데, 1900년도에 3%만 도시에 살다가 2050년이 되면 80%의 인구가 대도시에서 살게 되면 어떤 문제들이 일어날 것인가. 어떤 수명 연장도 일어나고, 그 다음에 슈퍼컴퓨터나 인공지능, 뭐 다양한 이런 기술 변화들이 우리에게 긴급하게 다가옵니다. 이런 분야에 이제 일자리가 있다라는 이야기죠, 사실은. 도시농업, 사람들이 이제 실내에서 농업을 할 것이고, 고기를 배양해서 먹을 것이고, 배양육. 그리고 마지막에 앞으로 이러한 이 변화들이 일어나면 대부분 산업시대에 일어났던 산업들은 이제 피크를 찍고 내리막길 추락하고 있는 중입니다. 사람들이 1인 기업 각자 창업하는 시대에 메이커 운동이 일어나기 시작한다라고 두 분께서 정리를 하십니다. 여러 질문들 중에 플로어에서 지금 저 질문하실 분이 계시면 간단하게 손 들고 직접 전화. 예, 김광조 차관보님.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, both speakers, for your very interesting, exciting future stories. But I don't want to be provocative, but I'm left to wonder about the accuracy of a prediction. So my first question goes to Mr. Thomas Frey. Now we are in the year 2014, and your prediction is mostly around 2030. So back in 1999 or the year 2000, obviously you made lots of predictions. So could you tell us how much of your prediction back then are now the reality? And that's the first question. Second question, perhaps to both of you. You are predicting about the technology, demographic change, and many other changes. I understand this. You are predicting or foretelling the future at the global level. So I wonder if you are making prediction for a particular society or nation, like Korea. So just like Herman Kahn, can you tell us, many Koreans in the floor, where Korea will stand in the year 2030 in terms of economic standing? And will Korea be the global hub of many things? Please share your insights. Thank you.
All right. There's just a few questions in there, so I'll try to do my best to answer that. As far as predictions in the past, there's been any number of predictions that have come true, but as with all futurists, there's other ones that haven't come true. I predicted the collapse of the income tax system in the United States, which still hasn't happened, and we're still rooting that will happen somewhere along the way. But there's everything from the flying drone era, which was started a long time ago, to driverless cars. We were predicting that 10 years ago, and these are things that are moving very quickly now. 3D printing, we've been looking at that ever since it first came out, and that's been something that's been on our radar screen. All of these technologies, once you start seeing some activity, then you're trying to track when it's going to start getting traction. So in the futurist movement, if you will, in the futurist arena, there's lots of debate about whether or not we should actually be predicting anything, because invariably when you predict something and you get it exactly right, somehow when we get there it feels different. And so a lot of what I tend to focus on is more of the overarching trends, which are the driving forces happening behind the scenes, and hopefully people then have a better sense of making their own decisions in light of that backdrop. So as far as how this is going to affect countries and how this is going to affect other things in the world, we've had this interesting debate at the Da Vinci Institute about this topic of 100 years from now, what's going to be the most powerful entity in the world. And I find this to be such an interesting discussion because today the power of a single nation is the most powerful entity on earth. But 100 years from now, that might change. It could be the power of an individual corporation. It could be a religion. It could be an association, some other type of organization. It could be a city even. And so, when you think about, I spend a lot of time thinking about how the future gets formed and our relationship with the future. So there are many things that I can predict with a high degree of probability. I can predict that this building is still going to be here six months from now with a high degree of probability. I can predict that the Earth is going to travel around the sun in roughly the same orbit 100 years from now, again with a high degree of probability. I can predict things like we put seeds in the ground and a certain percentage of those seeds are going to sprout and grow. Predict the seasons, the summer, spring, winter, fall, are still going to be around 50 years from now. So most of our future is being formed around these slow, stable entities. And so the things that are the highest variables are the things like dealing with weather and animals and people, and the degree to which you can more accurately focus in on predicting the activities of people or the weather, those type of things, the better you can more accurately predict the future. So the overall thinking of futurism is that if you can actually get 1% more accuracy, that gives a company a huge, significant advantage. So these are, we're spending a lot of time thinking about these type of things. So where is Korea going to be in the overall economy in the future? One of the biggest challenges that Korea has right now is the lowest birth rate on the planet. If you don't have any people, people are what creates the economy. If you don't have any people, then you're not going to have much of an economy. And so that's going to be a huge challenge going into 2030, 2050, that is going to be very hard to overcome unless you change immigration policy or something. That will dramatically affect your overall standing in the global marketplace. I think you've done very well on virtually everything else. I mean, the technology, the education, even healthcare. So the
Tom,
yeah.
any advice for Korean students for the
Say that
future emerging jobs?
Oh, future jobs?
Jobs, so any advice to the audience?
Okay.
How to prepare?
So as far as future jobs, yeah, I use this idea of exponential capabilities, that every time it takes less effort to do something, we can accomplish more. And so the things that took a lot of time in the past to accomplish something are becoming less and less, so we can actually accomplish more. So we tend to think linearly about what our future accomplishments are going to be. We actually need to start thinking exponentially, because we can accomplish 10 times as much in the future, 100 times as much in the future. And so I always think of it this way: a person with a toolbox is more valuable than a person without. A person with a computer is more valuable than a person without a computer. A person with a robot is more valuable than one without. And so as we have humans, the capability of humans gets leveraged by all this technology and is going to enable us to accomplish 10 times to 100 times more in the future. And so we need to actually set our goals on much higher goals in the future.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with what Tom said, particularly about Korea and South Korea and the demographic challenges it faces. Herman Kahn always believed that the key role of the futurist was to educate policymakers about potential futures, to give them the widest possible, greatest possible opportunity to shape the future for the most positive direction possible. Key to that is staying ahead of, is to imagine disruptive scenarios. Some of those disruptive scenarios involve technology, and it means getting ahead of the technological curve. Here in Korea, he convinced President Park to go a certain way, but there are also strategic and geopolitical consequences about thinking about the unthinkable. And the demographic challenge is one thing here in South Korea. The geopolitical situation on the Korean Peninsula is immensely challenging. It will be a complex challenge probably for decades, maybe less than decades. Will technological innovation lead to the collapse of North Korea? Will North Korea think about the unthinkable and decide to take military action against the South? Can peaceful coexistence exist between the two? What about the future of China? Will China be able to handle the disruption of economic slowdown in the midst of massive urbanization? The nationalities question keeps on flaring internally in China. Obviously, tensions between China and Japan, and also differences between South Korea and Japan pose broader challenges. The U.S. alliance structure is unfortunately now at a significant period of weakness, and so South Korea is in, as they say, an interesting neighborhood, and so all of these issues. The economic developments here may continue to go in the right direction, putting aside the demography, but the challenge, and North Korea could be a huge boon if at some point the government falls somehow peacefully, and you can somehow slowly over time integrate, educate 25 million people, which would demographically help in some ways, though pose massive economic costs, unbelievable economic costs. So one has to think creatively about these challenges as well.
감사합니다. 그 출산 장려가 굉장히 중요하다. 우리나라가 최저 출산국이기 때문에 앞으로 인구 없이 경제 발전도 없어질 수가 있고, 또 여러 가지 부사하는 기술들이 있고 전공들이 있겠지만은 기술보다는 툴박스를 가져라 오히려. 그래서 여러 가지 무엇인가에 적응할 수 있는 이런 그 능력을 키우는 것이 좋을 것이다. 켄 와인스타인은 좋은 정부가 좋은 정책을 만들었을 때에 여러분에게 뭐 다양한 일자리 창출이라든가 혜택이 올 것이고, 한국에 특별히 이분은 지금 글로벌 지정학적인 이런 한국의 문제에 대해서 실제로 연구를 하고 계시는 분이고, 한국이 지금 남북 간의 갈등들이 10년 후에 어떻게 될 것인가, 통일이 올 것인가, 갈등이 올 것인가, 중국 주변 국가에서 기술이 발전해서 새로운 기술이 나와서 우리 한국에 어떤 영향들을 미칠 것인가에 대해서 설명을 드렸는데, 이분들이 지금 오늘 하루 종일 여기에 오후에도 계시고요. 시간들이 많지 않기 때문에 오늘 김강조 선생님 질문만 받고 나머지는 개개인 오시면은 제가 또 통역도 해드리고 마치는 걸로 하겠습니다. 정말 감사합니다.